All right, here we go. Stepping down the ladder of the legislative branch, we're going to be looking at state and local legislative branches today. And when we talk about this idea of stepping down the ladder, almost think about it like that pyramid that we looked at before, where at the top we have one U.S. Congress that oversees the entire country. And then every state, all 50 states, have their own unique way of organizing their state governments. Stepping down that ladder a little bit more, we have over 3,000 county governments in the United States. There's 87 here in Minnesota. You live in Dakota County. We are one of the 87 county governments in the United States. And at the local level, it's even more, that there are over 39,000 local governments in the United States. Minnesota has 854 municipal or city governments and over 1,700 township governments. Just like the federal government, Minnesota also has the division of powers between the legislative, executive, and judicial. The main job, just like the federal legislative branch, is to make laws, to oversee and pass laws for the entire state of Minnesota. Minnesota has a bicameral legislature, just like the federal government, meaning it has two houses. We have a House of Representatives and we have a Minnesota State Senate. Actually, 49 out of the 50 states are exactly like this. There's only one state in the United States that has a unicameral, meaning one House of Congress government, and that's Nebraska. They only have a House of Representatives, and they're just weird because of it. The Minnesota House of Representatives is structured very similar. It's actually exactly the same as the U.S. Federal House of Representatives, where we have a Speaker of the House, majority leaders from each party, a minority leader, a majority leader, and party whips. State of Minnesota has 134 state representatives that are going to serve the members of their districts. So if we have 134 representatives, that means we have 134 legislative districts here in the state of Minnesota. When we talked about the qualifications to be a U.S. Senate or U.S. representative, they're up there. You have to be at least 25 years old, U.S. citizen. Qualifications to be a member of the Minnesota House of Representatives, you only need to be 21 years old. So they lowered that from the 25. You have to be a resident of the state of Minnesota for at least 1 year and the district you want to represent for at least 6 months before the election. We elect these representatives to 2-year terms, so same thing as the U.S. Federal House of Representatives. And like I said, the state of Minnesota is divided into 134 legislative districts, 134 members, 134 legislative districts. The Minnesota State Senate is similar to the U.S. Senate, where we have a president of the Senate. This is a difference here that in the federal Senate, the U.S. Congress, the president of the Senate is the vice president, so a member of the executive branch. State of Minnesota, the president of the Senate is actually a Minnesota state senator. The second in command for the executive branch is the lieutenant governor. They are not the president of the Senate in the Minnesota State Senate. So we don't have a president pro tempore because we don't have that member from the executive branch coming to oversee the Minnesota State Senate, so they just cross that out. Minnesota State Senate has 67 senators. If you remember, the federal has 100, 2 from each state. Minnesota has 67, so 67 senatorial districts. Qualifications, they're the same thing as the Minnesota State Representatives. 21 years old and resident of Minnesota for at least 1 year and the legislative district you hope to represent for 6 months. This is where Minnesota gets a little funky. If you remember, to be a U.S. senator, they serve 6-year terms. Minnesota, you serve 4-year terms if the year ends in 2 and 6. If the year ends in a 0, so 2020, they will start serving a 2-year term. So in 2022, they will run for a 4-year term. It's funky. It has to do with congressional districting and how they redraw all of the lines. Minnesota's funky. It's just the way it is. So federal government, state government, we're going to start talking about local government. In local government, we're going to first be talking about county governments. And county governments from there will go down into city and township, tribal governments. The main purpose of local government is to provide services for its residents. Where the state and federal, they're making laws for the entire state, they're going to provide some services. But for the most part, the things that impact you on a day-to-day basis come from local governments, starting at county governments. They're going to keep records. They're going to keep your driver's license, marriage certificates, death certificates. They report that information to the state of Minnesota. They're going to maintain parks and roads. They're going to run elections and run hospitals, offer and provide clean water to its residents. Counties have three sources of where they get this money to pay for all of these things. The smallest chunk actually comes from the federal government. So if you think about, there's over 3,000 county governments. The federal government, if they're going to take that money and divide it up to all 3,000, there's not a lot there. They also get some from state, but the majority comes from the county itself. And this goes for city governments and it goes for township as well. That most of these funds are going to come from property taxes, sales taxes, and fees. We've talked about how at the federal level, the legislative branch, the state level, the legislative branch, their number one job, the most important job is making laws. When we move down that rung to county government and township, city, they actually start passing things called ordinances. Ordinances are regulations that govern a community. Think about ordinances like laws, that it's very similar, but it's an ordinance for a specific group of people living in a community. Ordinances have the force of law, but they can't conflict with state and federal law. So remember, federal law, state law, county law. So it kind of goes down that ladder there. Local governments also are responsible for enforcing state laws and federal laws. This is one of their big responsibilities, that the state of Minnesota, it's too difficult for them to enforce every law, so they rely on local, township, county governments to enforce state laws. They also run and organize our state elections. They provide polling places. They supervise the voting process. This is done at a local level. They provide for a standard of weights and measures, and so kind of what that means is that they make sure that a gallon of milk costs about the same regardless of where you are living in the state. So that way, if you're living in Minneapolis in Hennepin County, that a gallon of milk doesn't cost $1, where in Dakota County it costs $5. So they're going to keep things very similar there. Talking about county government, you live in Dakota County. Dakota County is divided into districts, just like the state of Minnesota is. You guys live in District 1. Most of you will live in District 1. Some of you live in District 6. Some of you may live in District 4, may live in District 7. If you live in Farmington, you live in District 1. County governments are interesting in that they actually have kind of a weird dynamic with the state. If you live in a county like Dakota County that follows what's called Dillon's Rule, the county actually has to get all of their authority from the state legislature before they can provide services and legislate at the local level. So they are kind of what's seen as like an extension of the state government. States that have home rule allow counties to have a little bit more freedom to make decisions for themselves, that they're a little bit more independent. At the local level, at the county level, the group of people that are making the laws, they're called the Board of Commissioners. The board has some legislative powers because it passes county laws or ordinances. So at the county level, Board of Commissioners, they are elected by you to serve and make laws. At the smaller than county, at the municipal level, so city government. So if you ever heard the word municipal, it just means city government. They are organized around this thing called a charter, and a charter defines the format, the organizations, how this city is going to run its government. And the two most common types of city government are mayor council and council manager. We'll talk about the powers of a mayor and a manager when we look at the local executive branch. But where we're at right now is when we're talking about ordinances or laws that are passed within the state or the city of Farmington, the city of Lakeville, the city of Rosemount, they're passed by a city council who is elected by you to 4-year terms. At least Farmington is 4-year terms. So they are the ones making the laws at the municipal level. At the township level, so if we're talking about townships, there are at least 20 states that have townships. So most of them are in the Midwest and Northeast. They're just a step down from a city. Voters elect a board of commissioners or a board of trustees that oversees the township. So if we're talking about Empire, they're going to make the ordinances that oversee the people living in that community. Often the municipal and county governments provide some of these services that if it's not a big enough township, they don't have enough tax revenue, they can't pay for water, they can't pay for a fire department, that the county or city nearest them will help provide some of those services for the township. The largest area of local government are these things called special districts. And special districts oversee a very specific need within a community. I'm going to try to get this so I can actually see what I'm getting at right here. So maybe that won't work. Sorry, Farmington, I'm covering up the tiger. So special districts are units of government that focus on a specific service. So that is school districts, cemeteries, transportation, fire protection. It's one group organized to meet a specific need and just focus on one thing. Where Dakota County, the city of Farmington, they have a bunch of different services and needs that they kind of look at and oversee for that community. Special districts serve very specific purposes. The goal is to serve people living in a community. There's a ton of these different special districts out there. The most common are school districts. There's 336 school districts in the state of Minnesota. And the people who are making the regulations, they're not really called ordinances, but how a school district is going to run, they are the school board. School districts are run by school boards. The school boards provide the rules and organization for how schools are going to run. We pay for all of this through fees and property taxes collected in the communities. The last and probably one of the most unique groups that we're going to be looking at of local government is actually tribal government. Tribal governments have a unique standing within the United States and the state of Minnesota in that they have equal footing with the state of Minnesota. So if you're looking at all of these different Native American reservations here in the state of Minnesota, they are kind of on par when it comes to their legislative authority in the state of Minnesota. And they have a government-to-government relationship with the federal government. Sometimes they're kind of considered a nation within a nation. So they are all independent, sovereign governments that make their own rules, their own laws. They have their own structure. They provide services for their own people. They provide education, emergency responses. And the group of people that are passing these ordinances, these laws within a tribal Native American reservation, it's typically a tribal council. They're going to hold the power. So if we're talking about the White Earth Tribal Council, they pass laws in tribal codes. So it gets really interesting and unique when we're talking about state law versus tribal law. They're on par. State or tribal law and federal law. The federal government does have some authority over that, but that's usually powers that have been given to the U.S. government from the tribe.